Hello, this is Dr. Jeff with Ed Family. Today, I have an amazing guest with me today, Mollie Hackett with the DBQ Document-Based Questions Project. I had the opportunity to attend her DBQ camp this past summer, and as a result, it helped me so much more in implementing DBQs. But before we get into DBQs, let's begin with Mollie. Mollie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name's Mollie. I live out on the West Coast in Vancouver, Washington. And prior to joining the DBQ Project team, I taught high school in Seattle, Washington. And it was while teaching AP European that I was first exposed to DBQs. I loved them. I loved the way it engaged my students. I love the way it intellectually engaged my students the most. And I really wanted to take it down to all students. And so when I stumbled across the DBQ project and saw that their main mission was to democratize the DBQs and make it accessible to all students, that sold me. I also had another job for a short while where I worked at a program called Choices Education from Brown University. So I've been in the professional development field now for 15 years, first with the Choices Education and now with the DBQ Project. And the DBQ Project, I wear many different hats. So I work on professional development, I work with our partnering districts, and I also do curriculum development.
Oh, that's wonderful. They're very fortunate to have you, Mollie. On one hand, you have that background experience as an educator. And then on the other hand, you have that side-by-side, also very important experience with professional development. And now you've been with the very famous DBQ project. For our listeners who may not know what the DBQ project is, what is the DBQ project?
Sure. So as you mentioned, DBQ stands for document-based question. And it's really an inquiry approach to learning. So it originated out of the AP College Board world. And then now it's really becoming something that all students are doing. But the idea is you start with a compelling question, a driving question that students have to answer. But unlike with maybe using a textbook, the answer is never directly given to kids. It's kids kind of stepping into the role of historian, and they have to read and interpret and draw conclusions from a series of documents. And what I love about it is seeing them have those aha moments. That it's a mystery that they're trying to solve. And so as they're reading and interpreting something, and all of a sudden it's almost like you see the light bulb go off right in front of you when they've drawn their own conclusions. So that's the heart of it. And with that, I find that students take ownership of their learning. So again, it's their conclusions, they're doing the interpretation. And so there's a stronger attachment to what it is that they're learning. And then the DBQ project part of it is that we're not just giving them DBQs. We're wanting to teach kids how to do DBQs. And so we have our 6-step method that really chunks the process and scaffolds the process and guides them through how to do a very complex task. And then we also really have a lot of professional development so that we can really help teachers improve their own practice at implementing DBQs. So we see ourselves as an instructional tool, not just an assessment tool, to teach critical thinking and close reading and evidence-based writing in a very structured way that guides them through the process.
Wow, so many great gems from that sharing about the DBQ project. I think you answered some of these, but I'm going to just ask it again. So there's so many different ways to teach history, and other subjects, but why the DBQ project? What's your why?
My why is, again, that sense of ownership. That's my personal biggest why, is that as students go through this process, it is an inquiry process to learning. And that process of uncovering things and having those aha moments really gives them that sense of ownership of what they learn. And I find it sticks better. In my own classroom, when I taught with DBQs, this is what they enjoyed. They walked away excited about that, and that's what we all want. And they were really developing into critical thinkers. So again, I think that sense of ownership is my biggest why for doing this. And then I think, for school districts, we're looking for solutions for closing the achievement gap. And we help to do that. So we really put an emphasis on those skills. The nice thing is you're marrying content with skills. So you're learning how to do this kind of close reading, but at the same time you're learning history. You're learning these core ideas from history. So it's a nice marriage between the two.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad that you mentioned about the skills, because while it's very serious content, right, primary and secondary sources that students are looking at, in our district, it's not just the content that we want to teach in our courses, it's also the skills. And you talked about side by side the content with the skills. In the district I work in, there's a focus on communication, collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, compassion, the 5 C's. How does, in your opinion, does DBQ accelerate the 5 C's as well?
That's a really good question. So there's a lot of ways. Number one, in terms of collaboration, throughout our process, we really encourage this to be a collaborative process. That we have kids engage in text-based discussions together, and that they're supporting each other and having dialogue too. It's not just that we want them to sometimes be controversial. We even have an activity called the thrash out, where they're debating the question and they're learning to engage in academic discussions. That also means having to listen and learn from your peers. It's not just speaking to your peers, but taking in what they have to say. So that collaboration piece is central to the DBQ. And I think one of the things you talk about, the idea of compassion. Um, I think one of the challenges we're having in the world today is people put on their blinders to ideas that are different than their own. And we get our news source from some feed coming across social media, and it supports our ideas, are already the ideas, assumptions that we already hold. And what we want kids to do is keep an open mind. And so if you can teach them, if you can expose them to different viewpoints and have them really take each viewpoint seriously, that's going to help build compassion. That there's other ideas out there that they need to consider and take it, and not just assume that their idea is right and someone else's idea is wrong. And so we really, each DBQ focuses on different perspectives within a unit. A lot of them, we've developed a lot of new units that have really embraced the idea of that idea of diverse perspectives. And so we'll have units about the Chinese Exclusion Act, where you get a sense of again, the Chinese perspective, various Chinese perspectives on what that meant to them. But you also get the perspective of those people who, what were they fearing? Why were they doing this? And so, and not necessarily mean that we have to agree with their fear, but I think as historians, we maybe have to understand, like, okay, if this happened then, if I understand how people reacted back then, I maybe can understand what's going on in the world today as well, and why people are reacting the way they are, and what impact that has on various groups of people. And so they're really learning a lot of diverse perspectives as they go in. That's going to help them be better citizens in this world too.
I love what you mentioned about students having the opportunity to look at different perspectives. There's no right answer, is there, for each one of these DBQs? It's just multiple perspectives. And really the focus is on looking at the evidence, looking at the reason, and then being able to communicate it in a good way, in a civil way. And so it seems like there's a natural connection, not only to the content, not only to the 5 C's, but also, like you mentioned, that 5th C, building compassion, character, and then that civic engagement and learning, that connection to civic engagement. Do you see DBQs enhancing civic engagement and learning as well?
Oh, most definitely. There, again, part of it is, I talked about that idea of one of the problems we've gotten into in the world today is people are in their silos and they're listening to their news broadcast or their news feeds, and they're not hearing that. And so again, they're getting exposure to this idea of, I have to take into account different perspectives. But in addition to that, I need to think analytically about this. I need to consider, who is the source? Is this a reliable source? What's their purpose? And so as they're listening to politicians on TV or other people on TV, they don't just take everything at face value. They look at it critically and say, okay, who is their audience? What are they trying to accomplish with this? So all these skills, the nice thing is we introduce them in a way that's safe. We introduce it with historical subjects, but those same skills apply to citizenship. That when we get into the really deep controversial stuff that's going on today, they have a mechanism developed for dealing with that and for being critical consumers of information. And then the idea that we want them to be able to articulate their ideas and to support their ideas with reasoning and with evidence. So that again, doesn't become a shouting match. It doesn't become I'm right, you're wrong. It really becomes a dialogue about ideas as well as evidence. And so that's the way we really support the civics. Some of our units also have extension pieces so that, like, what can you do next? So if you've learned about this concept, how can we apply that to today? And we also encourage teachers, even if it's not directly in the unit, encourage teachers to do that as a next step. So you've learned about this. Let's look at how it applies in the world today and how we can kind of take what we've learned and apply it to our political system, our community, anything like that.
Oh, I think that's a really powerful connection you're making to the DBQ project, and then how it applies to our current context and different kinds of issues, different kinds of events that are happening today. Thank you for sharing that reflection on that. I think that's an important piece, one that can easily be forgotten, but we're just hearing from the expert today, Mollie Hackett, and she's just giving us a pro tip right there. Really appreciate you, Mollie, for sharing that. And then when it comes to the DBQ materials out there, I'm more familiar with the history materials. I appreciate you sharing about the Asian American Studies material that is being currently developed. I don't know if I shared this with you, Mollie, but I recently wrote a course for the district that I work in for our Asian American Studies class.
Awesome.
And so it's good to know that there's these resources that are being created. And what other resources are there? I know I'm focusing mainly on history, but I know there's more to DBQs than just history. What else is out there?
So yeah, we have several history binders for U.S. history and world history. And we even have here in California, we have a California history binder as well as some state history binders. But we also have a civics binder that's out there that teaches a focus both on government as well as civic engagement and students' role. So we have what makes a good citizen? A question like that, or we have questions about the electoral college, so they understand should the electoral college be abolished? Again, there is no right answer. They have to bring in evidence, and so they better understand their government system. We have a world geography binder that explores a lot of different concepts. So we have one on a unit on gentrification in that binder. We have a unit on climate change. We have a couple historical units on like migration, the push-pull factors of the Great Migration. One on NAFTA. So there's a lot of current issue units. Even though it's a geography binder, it deals with a lot of more contemporary issues through a geographic lens to those issues. And then we have literature binders. And so we have 3 in literature, one for middle school, 2 for high school, that explore seminal works of literature. But again, we try and make them that the units have maybe some documents. Some of the documents are excerpts from that piece of literature, but then we might have a historian chiming in on the same kind of subject. So they're able to cross-reference different types of documents within that. And then lastly, we have elementary binders now that are for grades 3 through 6. And we know that most elementary teachers are not just history teachers. They have to do it all. And so within those binders, we'll have like a math unit that looks at math concepts, or we have some environmental units in that, or even some science units in that. So it's more interdisciplinary in the elementary binder. So those are the materials we have currently.
Oh, thank you for sharing. I know one thing I love about the DBQ project is all the materials are vetted by veteran teachers. They've tried it out in their classrooms. They pilot test it. Feedback is given all from the teachers, and DBQ project listens and adds that feedback in. So it's one of my go-to sources, definitely. So when I'm building out a course, I'm always thinking DBQ project, what do they got first? And it's a great place for me to get a lot of different resources and definitely provide a lot of variety to the kinds of projects that I do in my own class. If I might have some different kinds of projects, but if I want DBQ style projects, man, the DBQ project is a great place to go. Before we close, Mollie Hackett, any final thoughts or words for our Ed Family listeners? Our vision here is to help students find out what they're good at so that they can do good with it. Do you have any words of advice for any of our Ed Family listeners?
Well, first of all, just thank you for all those teachers out there doing the hard work. I know it's been, and especially the last 2 years, have been really kind of unusual and kind of an upheaval to what we do. So thank you for being there and doing that hard work and standing by your students. And then, with regard to DBQs, you had mentioned, Jeff, earlier, that idea that, it's we can produce materials that I think are great, but it also, the teacher is an important role, and you have to think about your students and how you connect with your students around it, and showing your own excitement and engagement for the topic. And so it's not just handing them a packet and saying go do it. It's really a lot of guided instruction and thinking about, how do I provide a rationale for doing this? How do I provide that motivation for doing this? Because it is hard work. That's the one thing we always emphasize. This is hard work. And that motivation piece is critical for getting kids over the hump when they're doing the hard work. So that a lot is on you teachers to think about, of how do you connect and how do you motivate your students on that more personal level.
Oh, thank you, Mollie, for those words of encouragement, and for being a resource for so many teachers on how we can support our students, build that rigor, build that expectation, build that skill, so that they can use that skill for their future for good. So thank you so much, Mollie Hackett, for just joining us on the Ed Family channel.
Sure. And one last thing, if anybody wants to check us out, we're at dbqproject.com. And you can go there, and there's access to all kinds of information. And there's access to a phone number and email if you have further questions too.
It's Mollie Hackett at DBQ Project, dbqproject.com. I'll put that in the description as well.